Hey, well, welcome back to Alice Customs Project Car TV. Today I'm working on the Dodge Dakota Sport again, and we're making some upper control arms. First, I want to say thank you to all of you who have subscribed and started to follow along with this truck. I know it's kind of got a smaller group of people who are super interested in this particular vehicle, but the nice thing is a lot of the work I'm doing can be transferred to so many other vehicles. So please, thank you again for following along. We've had some great responses to the videos. As I said, today we're going to do upper control arms. You saw me make the lowers. Going to do it in a similar fashion. A few different things, mostly because of the compact size of this. Like, we have quite a distance here we need to take care of, but we have very short distance between the pivot point and the ball joint. Now this one's for the passenger side, and I'm going to pan in here just a second onto the table where I've already started my jig. And what I've done is I've already gone through, knocked out the factory bushings, and then I took the factory bushings and put them in my lathe and just skim coated or skimmed off a few thousandths of an inch, so that they are now, instead of being press fit, they are now a slip fit, so that I can take them in and off, or off and on the jig. The points for the pivot are now set and welded to the table. What I did to simulate the pivot point mounts, the studs that are in the truck, is I just took a piece of tubing, took a 9/16 nut, because a 9/16 bolt fits through there perfectly, and put two of them on my lathe and spun them down to where they would just slide inside the tubing. Drilled a hole through the tubing to make a plug weld, slid the nut up inside there, plug welded it in, and now I have a sleeve that a bolt will drop down into and thread into, and then I can weld. And I just cut off about 2 inches. I could weld those 2-inch stubs to the table and then run a bolt down through them. So I didn't need to weld a stud up in there and try and get all that level. All I had to do was make these standoffs and make them the same length, and everything fits. And then for the ball joint side, I did just like I did on the rears. I made a plate that matched the pattern of the rivets. We're going to use bolts, just as if you were replacing your ball joint, you would bolt it on. And I made a plate for that, took another piece of tubing, and I just used some scrap tubing, so you're going to see it has a curve in it. The curve means nothing, it just happened to be a scrap that had a curve in it. It had been on the tubing bender. And that piece of tubing then supports it, and supports the ball joint area. And then the flats here, I tried to make those essentially level with the table. Not for much more reason than it just gave me a reference point if I needed to go back to when comparing it to what I'm doing on the truck. So let me zoom down here. Okay, again, so we've got our pivot points back here. Those are bolted on. You'll see that a little better when we take this off. Right now I don't have this welded down. I've just got it set. And what I've been doing is just trimming this off with a death wheel and a flap wheel until it's essentially the same plane as the table, but gives me this area of the A-arm essentially level with the table, same air gap across there. And that's where we're at now. So we're ready to weld this pin on. And again, it doesn't matter that there's a curve here. It just a piece of tubing that was scrap. I think these were both off the same piece, and I cut that bend and just used it. Now when we do this other one, we'll have to knock the ball joint off. We can bolt this on. We don't have to have, we will have to have this arm back out of here, but we can do that without messing with the ball joints, because we can, or the bushings, because we can use these bushings for mock-up. Set that in there, and then we'll put this plate, because they're going to have a slightly different geometry. So we'll be cutting this loose from the table, moving it just slightly to set up for that ball joint. Anyway, so this plate represents our ball joint. So this is the ball joint I knocked out of there. It would be underneath the A-arm and sitting in there. So that represents that. Now, I wanted to do, in my head, I was just going to do similar to what I did on the back of the truck. Make one that has a little bit, this one's actually already been wallowed out. Make one that has a little bit of extra support for the ball joint. Is it critical? Is it important? Probably not. Not even probably. No. It was just the way I thought it would, you know, fit nice, look good. Problem is, that would have to be a sandwich, so you would have to be able to slide your ball joint in, and that might work. You could maybe figure out how to do that, but you would have to cut the back end out, and ended up being that's probably not going to work unless we just use a plate like this, drill the holes, and just sandwich it with bolts, which we may do. We have 2 of them made. We just got to drill the holes in them. Instead, what I think we're going to do is come up with a different design for the A-arm mount side. We're going to have our plate that holds the ball joint, this being the ball joint, and have some vertical pieces that our tubing can run into, and that'll make more sense in a few minutes. But for now, we just need to, everything's tight over here. We just need to weld this to the table. Then we can take these 3 bolts out, the 2 nuts off the end, take this ball joint out of the way, show you the rest of the jig, and then we can move on with making the pieces that we need. So now we can come back, take this apart, and you can see the pieces of the jig sitting there. I'm going to let that cool a little bit before I actually unbolt it. I guess this had about 10 minutes to cool off so that it wouldn't spring around or anything. And I've pulled this off. So this is why I take the bushings. I was able to push them out, put them on my lathe, and just clean them up. You could do this with a drill press and a piece of sandpaper. Put a bolt through it, hang it from your drill press so it's spinning, and then just take a piece of sandpaper and sand it down until you knock off a little bit of material. And what you want is, instead of it needing to press fit in there, you want it to where it just slides in and it's snug. And that's what we've got. So that's done. And then, like I said, the ball joint was here, just like the other one. We knocked the rivets out. I made this plate, which is nothing fancy. It's just a piece of 3/16 or maybe 1/4 inch. It's a piece in the scrap pile. I laid my ball joint on the plate and knocked out with a transfer punch. Knocked where the center of the holes were. Got that done. And actually, I think I used the A-arm, not the ball joint for that. I think I used the A-arm by laying it up on there, stamping it, you know, knocking it out to get it all to fit. You can see there's some shape to this A-arm, so that's why there's these scallops in here. So these are the scallops I was talking about, and that's just so it fits the factory A-arm, the shape in it. And with that, then I could have these, and you can see the risers and the rosette weld there, and that's where the nut is. The nut's about right center of both those pieces of tubing, and they're just the same length piece of tubing, nothing special about them. And then that bolt fits down through there and holds the arms in the right place. Now, I am going to show you an interesting thing. The arm on the driver's side is straight. Okay? I'm going to show you the one on the passenger side. It's got all kinds of shape to it. So don't be surprised if your jig has to be modified multiple times, you know, for each side. But what we're going to do is, if we have to, we'll cut one of these posts loose, put the bolts back in, weld it where we need it, and then we'll move this plate. We should be able to reuse the plate, but we'll probably have to move it, or we should have to move it, because to get the right caster built into the A-arm. With this out of the way now, what we're going to be doing, what we needed is, we need some sleeves, and I made 4 because we got 2 A-arms to build, and they used the same bushings, and we're using factory bushings. So this is a piece of tubing, the inside diameter, and this is actually the same tubing for one of the bushings on the lowers, but I had to bore out the whole bushing, you know, make all the material thinner for the lowers. For the upper, most of it is the stock size, and then I just cut it to length, and then I had to bore out just about a 0.40 depth into, and take out about, it was like 60 thousandths or something. So these will press into there now. That's a factory one, or a new replacement, and this is the one that we just took off here, and they slide right in. It's a snug fit, but everything's going to be. And so, like I said, I made 4 of those. I don't know if you can see that. There it goes, it focused. So basically, this bushing needs to slide into that tubing, so we needed a 0.40 depth on the first, for that step, and the diameter needed to be 1.690 to leave us a little bit of a friction fit. And then we need, after the step, we need an inch of length at 1.610. Well, the tubing is already right there. It was like 0.1608 or 607 or something. So we didn't have to do anything. So you can see in there, the inside of the tubing is nominal for the design. And then we just put that one step in it. Cut it off, beveled all the edges. It's ready to go. Those took about, I'm very slow at machining. They probably took me about 25-30 minutes each. But, you know, it's kind of a nice little project to make those. So anyway, now these will slip in there, or press in there, not slip, like the ones we've trimmed down. And then we're going to need new ball joints, which we just ordered up a new set of factory ball joints. So those are here as well. Again, this plate represents the ball joint, and except the ball joint goes this way. So using these nice plates I made are not going to work unless we just sandwich them with bolts. And we may clean these up, powder coat them. The whole arm's going to get powder coated at the end anyway. Clean these up a little bit, make them pretty, put our holes in there, and just use it as a backing plate. And it just adds a little support out here to the ball joint. Is it necessary? Not even. It's complete overkill. What's next? So the next thing is we're going to take our trimmed up bushings, put that on there, one on this side, that on there. These are a metric thread, and I didn't have any nuts that would fit it, so we've got to use the factory nuts, which I hate doing because they're a lock nut. They're the ones that are like castle nuts. They've got a crimp in them. So I hate doing that, but it's the only choice we have. I just don't have, I guess I could run to the store and buy some more nuts. But, and then you can see these still kind of want to slide. So I'm going to take a small piece of scrap metal, and I'm going to stretch it between these just to make sure these stay out as far as we can, and I'll weld it in place just to hold them, just as a placeholder. They friction fit, but you can move them. You know, it's not super easy, but they'll move. So let's get a piece of metal and we'll do that. And then this is ready, and then we're going to come off of here. And all we got to do is come up with some kind of plate that sits here to hold the ball joint and tie it in with tubing. Now, I've got an idea on how I'm going to do it. I got to make the piece. All right, guys, so here's version 1 with, 6 pieces. Made a little heart shape, I guess. All I got to do is knock the holes in it. And then I was going to weld these on as supports. But of course, it needs to be on this side with the ball joint. And, oops, this way. And the problem there is there's no meat around the holes here. So, new plan. Went back, made a new version. Fits the same way, but now I have extra meat all around the ball joint. And it clears in there. So then I went ahead and made, instead of having them cut in half, I went ahead and just cut out some pieces that would do both sides at once. And then I just put a slot in the middle there so I could bend it easier. And then that's going to go on like that. That gussets the whole piece. And then my tubing can come in these locations. And I will probably have it hit this upright as well as kind of just go underneath the plate just a little ways. Kind of best of both worlds is my idea. But now I have the room that the ball joint fits, and I can have my gusset all on there. And the gusset's not going to sit 90 degrees or flush with the edge. I'm going to overlap them by this 1/4 inch material, so I'll overlap them by about 125 thousandths. And then that gives me a nice place to weld. You know, you're just doing a fillet weld then. I can weld this up, and then I'll weld the inside and the outside. That'll be way solid. First I'm going to go over, first I'm going to lay this on here, give myself a nice spacing for variance in ball joints, get my centers marked, go drill both of these plates, then I can bolt one on, get it welded, and then make my tubing. thought I'd cleaned that pretty well, but I got a little porosity in there, so once this cools down a little bit, I'll go back and grind that out, re-weld this one. May not get enough shielding gas, a little breeze or something, but I'll just grind that out, re-weld it. Meantime, I'm going to clean that off just a little bit and then weld up that corner. We're going to do it with a thin wheel, just so we can try and get all the way into that porosity. So we're going to weld this one, then grind that one out. Much better. I'm much happier with that. Well, I got a little undercut on this side, so I think I'm gonna run one more bead on that side right there, just to fill that in a little bit. You don't need everything quite as hot as it is. I'm gonna let that cool. Alright, so with that, this has actually got to fit on here like this. So we're going to have to trim up this mount a little bit. We'll just use the death wheel and trim up what we need to get this to fit on there. But what I'm showing you here is, you know, we all make mistakes. Just don't worry about it. Clean them up. If you have to re-weld something, re-weld it. If you have to remake it, remake it. I mean, I made these little heart-shaped pieces and the brackets twice. It's not the end of the world, and you'll be happier if the work is something that you can be proud of. I guess one of the things I always worry about is I make this stuff, and a lot of times I've already made one before I make the second one. In this case, we're seeing the first one. But, you know, so it looks easier than maybe it is, or it's easy to leave out a step or something if you're trying to explain it. But my point is, you know, hey, mistakes happen. Just work from that, and you'll be happy with it. This sits on here. That's gonna sit fine, so I just need to clean the little bearings up that are on there. So I've got my little brace on there to keep these spaced out far enough. And then we're going to go from here to here. If you look at the shape of this, we'd kind of see, you know, we would want to go up, but we have a shock hoop that is under here, or above it on the truck, but would be below this. So I'm trying to make a little extra room. So rather than curving up like this, I'm going to kind of curve this way. So we're going to come out and drop down, and that's going to give us a little more up travel. And then once we have it tacked together, take it off here, test fit it on the truck, and make sure it clears everything before we actually try and weld it all up. Looks like we need about 8.5, maybe 8 3/4 inches on the long side of the tube. More than that. Well, it's about 37 degrees. And this would be almost a square cut. And we could bend it out a little bit. We could even bend it in a little bit. But we've got a shock that's got to go in the middle here. So if anything, we're going to want to kind of come out. But we can't do like one bend with a super tight return bend. You just can't get it in the tubing bender that tight. And I think it's a 4-inch radius is the closest we can get. So if we wanted to do that, we'd have to bend right here, right off the joint, and then bend the other one way up closer to here to give us room between them. All right, I didn't actually cut a piece. This already had a cut on it that's pretty close to the right angle. It would be a little less dramatic. But when you look at that, just that straight line, I don't like it. I don't think it looks that good. So we're gonna start by coming out and doing a bend out here. We'll come out like this and do a bend this way, and we'll see how that looks. All right guys, here's what I came up with. Once again, I wish I would have put this piece of tubing in my lathe and sanded it down just to, you know, clean off the mill scale. So once we'll make this one and we'll just do it by hand, but then the rest of them for the next one I'll do exactly that. Anyway, so what I did first is that piece that had that angle cut, I put it in my tubing bender and I bent a 40-degree angle here and came back and looked at it, and if I shorten it up 2.5 inches so that we're almost right off this cup with our bend, then from the end of the bend to about where the ball joint mount is a roughly 6 inches. So centered that, and I put a bend right in the middle of it, or it's pretty close. It's a little off, but that gives it a little bit of height, which will get it away from my shock mount. And by doing this, I keep nice room in here. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut this and notch it. We need to notch it for this tubing size, and then we'll come back, lay this out pretty close, and then cut that square. And I'm not going to square this straight off of this. It's going to have a little bit of an angle, just so I can take up a little bit of the angle over here. Otherwise, this would have to be more like a 45 or a 50, which I could do, but I just thought it would look a little better if it had just a little angle on it. So it's just aesthetics for a lot of it, because this is 1-inch tubing with a 188 wall. So, and then, you know, we're only talking like 8 3/4 inches of material here, 9 inches of material. All right guys, so you can see what I'm attempting to do here. I've got this side notched pretty well, and I just had to do it manually with a flap wheel and, you know, cut it off and then do a flap wheel. But I want the tubing to go that way between 1/8 and 3/16 of an inch, so it's centered up on this cut. I also want this end to go down about 1/8. I want to leave just a little bit to where it kind of hangs over my weld just slightly. So we're going to notch it and let it set down. By shortening it, I believe it'll let me move it that way just a little bit, and it can go this way on our bracket just, yeah, between 1/8 and 3/16. So I think by putting that little notch on this end, so on the bottom here, that'll let it go that way and drop down just a hair, and everything should fit pretty nice then. And I've just been doing it with flap wheels and death wheels. And I'm down to cutting like a 1/16 of an inch at a time, maybe less than that. There we go. That's what I was after. Alright, so I'm going to bevel the edges of the tubing here so that we have a good, you know, good chance of getting penetration really well all the way around. And then I'm also going to put just a little slice in this tubing back about 1/2 inch. And I'm just going to slice back so that I can, I'm probably not going to cut quite a wedge out of there, pie shape or anything, but I'm going to just slice it back so that I can hammer that edge over and let it be nice and tight down here to our plate. I like this. It came out really good. I think we got it. Now you can see what I was talking about with my little pie shape. probably should not have welded that as much as I did because I want to test fit it on the truck, but if I have to cut it loose, I have to cut it loose. I mean, it's not like we could cut it loose and reuse the tubing. We have to make another piece of tubing. It's just kind of overdid it with the tacking. Should have held off a little bit. Anyway, next up we're going to make this tube, but it is quitting time for the day, so I will see you guys tomorrow. Few trims, but there it is. Nice fit. Same bends, 40 degree, a 15 degree, and I think it looks very symmetrical. So we'll get this one. May as well weld it the same way I did this other, and then we're going to test fit it on the truck. Let that cool off, pull it out of the jig, test it, and then assuming it fits correctly, we'll flip it over and weld up the rest and set up the jig for the other side. So, now there's things you could do. You could add a bar in here. I don't really think it's necessary because when you tighten this down, you have washers here. Everything locks in by pulling in tight. But you could have a bar here if you wanted. Again, we have a coilover shock that needs to be able to ride through here, so adding too much cause problems. I may add a small gusset in here, but even that's probably just simply excessive overkill. But if you're not going to do excessive overkill, what kind are you going to do? So, because we could do a little triangle there and then a triangle on the vertical side. So, you know, again, I'm sure that's complete overkill with as much tubing and weld as here. But I'm very happy with the shape, so hopefully it fits as well as I think it will. We'll check that here in a few minutes when this has a little bit of time to cool off. Alright, so we've got the other side, bolted it down here. I've already knocked the ball joint loose, so we're gonna, and I did have to move this one bolt stud, whatever, bolt mounting point. So we're now going to weld that on, and then we can pull this off. We do need the bushings out of the other one that we made because they're already cut down. I also, because these washers are the ones that were on here to begin with, are larger in diameter than the bushing cups. So I went ahead and made, and what I say made, I found a washer that fits the bar here, and then I went, and they're a little thicker than the originals, but then I stuck this one on the lathe and turned it down to where it'll slip through there. In the meantime, I've got one of the originals here that I kind of cut down after I figured out that I couldn't take it all apart. But additionally, I did decide I'm going to put a little triangle here for a gusset, and then I'll probably put one off of the back of this onto that. Way overkill, but should make it nice and strong. All right, and our new cups. I'm going to use the bushings that were cut down. got to do now, build our tubes. So this moved in a little bit compared to where we had it before, but also because of the shape of this, we've moved back. You know, we used to be directly in line with these bolts, so we've moved back, so it's probably about the same. And these are about the same, about 8.5, 8 3/4 inches. So I'm going to start with the same shape, a 40-degree bend, and then a bend away at 15 degrees into both of those, and make them. So it should take me about 20 minutes to bend both of those up, and we'll get them cut. Might have it all tacked together here in about 35, 45 minutes. Okay, so I've got my other one bent up. I cut my notches this time. And this piece of tubing was the one that I'd bent wrong for the last A-arm. I'd bent 2 of this same side instead of doing a mirror. And all I had to do is go back. I needed to add about 5 more degrees. So this bend is 45 degrees to get it to fit better, just because of the distance. So that's it though. It fits real nice. So I'm going to put a couple tack welds here and make the other side. Alright, well there it is. 45-degree bend, a 50-degree bend. I've got this in fish mouth, or not fish mouth, but notched. Go over everything. So let's go ahead and make our little gusset. Probably just use corner of this. We're just adding the gusset. Worked out really well. Clears there. These bends did a perfect job of clearing the shock hoop that mount, that the upper shock mount is welded to. And we've got our shocks ordered, so as soon as they get here, I will use these bushings again, reassemble everything one more time, get the shock in there. So it's not a hard project. It does take a little bit of time. So by the time I took the factory A-arm, knocked the ball joint off of it, jigged it up, I had to cut loose my mounts and move them around, bolt everything back down, clamp it, weld it to the table, then the bushings out so I could get the pivot bar out of there and put it on. And actually I'm talking like it's this one we made. This is the driver's side again. It's the passenger side that we made today, but it doesn't matter. Here together though. That's the driver's side. There's the passenger side. Alright guys, well, thanks for following along. I hope you really got something good out of this. If nothing else, to see it's not really that hard to make a set of custom A-arms. Now, we did stock geometry, so you can lengthen them a little bit, you could shorten them a little bit. If you do that, you want to check your ball joint geometry, because ball joints are made, to be kind of neutral at ride height, and that gives them flex either direction, whether you're, as you're compressing the suspension or letting the suspension extend down, the ball joint can move around. And so you would want to look at that ball joint geometry if you lengthen or shorten your A-arms. But if you're just going with a stock version, all you need is some way to pivot the factory end of the A-arm and some way to mount where the ball joint goes. Now in this case it was 3 bolts. Some models, they have a screw-in ball joint. That's even easier because you buy a new cup with the threads, come up with a dummy ball joint. A lot of the companies that sell the cups sell the dummies so that you can mock these things up. But figure out what you're going to need to mount your ball joint. I built these upside down because that's the way the ball joint would slide out of it. So doing it that way means that I know I can put this plate over here, this mount, these are still hot, put this mount over here and know that, okay, that's the pretend ball joint. So anything I build to that, as long as I build away from it, I'm not gonna get my ball joint on the wrong side or something. So you gotta think about that a little bit, but it's really not that hard. Anyway, you mount everything up. In my case, I welded it to my table. If you don't have this, do a bunch of bolts. You know, you just want it as rigid as you can get it. So you could go get a piece of 1/4-inch plate, 2 foot by 2 foot, and make them up. So hopefully you've already watched the lower A-arms being built. And just a reminder, I just used some angle iron and again, a piece of scrap steel with the holes drilled in it that match the body or the ball joint mount. So super easy. You can do this at home. Again, if you're doing custom suspension, custom links, yeah, you're gonna need to put a little more thought into your geometry on your ball joint or whatever. In my case, I just needed enough slope in these arms, enough bend in these arms to clear my shock tower hoop, and go back and look at that video. But that allows these things to come all the way up. Basically, when they're mounted like this, they're mounted to where they can pivot all the way up, and that shock hoop is right in here. And that's what this bend is for. It lets that just clear and give me plenty of travel, up travel especially, without hitting that bar and bottoming out the suspension before we want it to. We have more travel now available to us than the factory suspension did, and we're going to end up being limited by our shock length. Fact is, you can only travel so far. What happens now is the tire with the factory suspension installed and a factory tire on it, when I ran it all the way up, I had a little bit of gap. I could rotate the tire when it got all the way up. With these, the tire bottoms out in the wheel well and is hard in there, and I still have another inch that these could travel up. So I didn't even need as much travel here. I could have probably done the straight bars like we talked about at the very beginning. They were ugly. I wanted a little shape, but it would have worked. And that's the other thing. Nobody's gonna see these after they're installed, right? You put a tire on them, nobody sees them. So you're making yourself happy when you put shape and stuff in them if you're not doing it to clear a wheel or a tire or some piece of the frame or whatever. You're making yourself happy to make something that looks pretty. You know, I'll call them pretty. Could have done it with straight bars, would have been just fine. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all the other YouTube stuff. Comment down below if there's something you think that I should be doing, I could have done differently, could have done better. I don't know. This is my idea, but I've made exactly like 3 sets of these things, you know, 3 different vehicles ever. So I'm always learning something. And yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.